is a wonderful, wonderful effort headed by IDC and several other Coptic organizations and non-Coptic organizations that has had a pretty wide, I would say, pretty wide support in terms of Democrats and Republicans, because it is really a bipartisan and also nonpartisan issue. And it calls for greater attention to what's going on in Egypt, what's going on with Copts in terms of their right to build churches, and in terms of other rights that are kind of infringed. And then what's going on in Minya is a village in is a province in Upper Egypt that experiences a terribly high number of attacks, both on Coptic citizens, their person, their businesses, and especially the churches. And so I'm going to elaborate a little bit on how the structure of kind of discrimination or repression is set out in Egypt. But so that is an area to definitely be aware of and definitely keep our eyes on.
Absolutely, absolutely. Sara wrote a fantastic article on Minya province called No Country for Copts about a year ago. So if you want to learn more, we'll make sure and send a link for that. And then Sara, can you also just talk about, you know, anything else that we should be aware of when it comes to the current situation of Egypt and Coptic Christians, things that maybe we see in the news? You know, do you want to make any clarifications, anything that we should be aware of?
Definitely. I would love to do that. Thank you for giving me that opportunity, Stephen. We are at a really critical time in the world, I would say today, with everything going on in the United States. Coptic Americans are not unfamiliar, obviously, with the ideas of discrimination, repression, and injustices. And so as I've been watching and participating in these protests, it really comes to mind the parallels between the situation of Copts in Egypt and the situation of minority groups in the United States. It's really your classic setup of infringements on the rule of law, institutional weaknesses, and general social exclusion. So to kind of elaborate a little bit on that, although the Egyptian constitution does guarantee equality for all religious groups adhering to kind of the Abrahamic tradition, which that in and of itself is an issue. It doesn't really expand upon the three Abrahamic religions. But even that being in there, there's a very large gap between the letter of the law and its implementation. And so this idea of equality for those religions isn't really adhered to when we witness that Copts are routinely excluded from the Egyptian public life. We are generally treated as a tolerated group, and don't really see any kind of proportionate or active role in things like public service, academia, national sports team, national security agencies, and more specifically to religious freedom. The practice of our religion is quite regulated in terms of being able to build churches, when we can use those churches, when we can renovate those churches, what we can put on top of the churches. Can we put a cross? Can we have a bell? So all of those little small kind of details are quite regulated. And then you have things like blasphemy laws that are used equally across the board against all minorities in Egypt on kind of an exaggerated and arbitrary basis. And so that's what I would say is the difference between what does the rule of law say, what does the law say, and how are we implementing it? And I think that's really akin to the plight of our brothers and sisters here in America. What does the law say? The law says equality and justice for all, but is that really the case? And so I think Coptic Americans can really zone in on that and understand that, you know, although we do live in this free country, not everybody experiences freedom in the same ways. So there's that. And then there's the institutional weaknesses that we experience in Egypt, especially with the sidestepping of the judicial system. And so we have something called reconciliation sessions. And whenever there is something like a church building that was attacked, or a Coptic business that was attacked, or a Coptic person that was attacked, rather than take these very significant violations of the law through the whole legal system and through the judicial system, we are relegated to a session called reconciliation sessions, which are essentially just like a group community mediation session in which the majority making, the majority of decision making is made by the majority population. And even though Copts in these situations are most likely to be the victims of the victims in these situations, they are essentially forced to forego their rights. And a lot of the times they're forced to leave the village that they were in, in which they experienced these violations. And so there are a number of cases like this that have never seen the light of day in court. So that is a big problem in terms of normalizing the idea of impunity for any actions taken against Copts. I'd also like to clarify that in order to understand how things affect Copts, or specific situations affect Copts, we also have to look at what is the climate in Egypt in general. So contrary to kind of Egyptian government-owned media, the climate in Egypt right now is highly repressive, with the amount of arbitrary detentions going up, especially well, I would not say especially against Copts, but I would say that I do need to mention a major Coptic human rights activist and researcher that was arbitrarily detained, Rami Kamel. He's been detained since November 23rd, no visits from his family or friends, no medical attention received by him. And they keep postponing his trial. And so how that affects us is a lot of us who are involved in kind of Coptic activism or activism in general relied on his research and his ability to go into the field and bring to light violations or issues that are being experienced. And so that has really impeded on our ability to do our job well. And so I think this is a really important point to be aware of. So I would be aware of those challenges that Copts face, and then the challenges that Egyptians face in general in the current climate in Egypt.
Well, thank you for that, Sarah. That was extremely thorough and very helpful. It's a very complicated dynamic. What I'd like actually to do is just to give you a second if you want to get a cup of water or catch your breath. We're very happy and blessed to have Archbishop Angaelos with us. So I just wanted to invite him to share any message that he might like to share while people think of questions that they can ask you, Sarah. Archbishop, can you, there you go.
Thank you, Stephen. When I had this come into my inbox, I couldn't possibly have missed it. At the risk of sounding patronizing, and I know Sarah knows that I'm not, I'm incredibly proud of this young woman for what she's doing, for the voice she has, and for being that strong and a conscience. And everything she said right then, I would categorically agree with. The spirit of the Coptic Church is unique in that we've gone through all that, but the one thing also that I always flag up is for some reason, it's quite inexplicable. We haven't fallen into a state of victimhood, which is really disempowering. because I think what's happened is that we've been able to see the challenges and rise to them. You know, we have for decades resisted the idea of being accepted or even termed as minority groups in our own country, in which we're indigenous peoples. And of course, you know, when the churches were burnt, we went out and people prayed in the shells of their burnt down churches the day after, and they had true forgiveness. So that's something we're all very blessed for. And just to, finally, Sarah, I know we have a lot of doctors and lawyers and engineers, but I'm glad we have one Sara Salama, and there'll be many more on the way. So thank you.